yours, buddy.
Okay, so hey everyone, our Mediawatch episode is Sick of the Sickness. So pretty much it's about how the media is covering COVID these days. But I wanted to ask, does anyone know how many people died from COVID yesterday? Anyone? Danny?
How many died yesterday?
Yeah, from COVID.
56.
56? No. It was like, from just COVID it was 17.
17.
Yeah, so
Okay.
and it was 35 in total.
Right, because I guess it's the, was it COVID, was it related to COVID, or did they die with?
17 from just COVID.
17, so I was way out, okay.
Yeah, so,
I feel humbled.
Also, yeah, keep note of that, Danny. But the point is that most of us don't really care about COVID like we used to. We've got fewer people wearing masks these days, especially indoors. And people can't even explain the traffic light city. So yeah, it's pretty problematic. This sort of cultural shift started to permeate throughout the winter, just like Omicron did. During the month when we had like a record-breaking 26 deaths in one day. So it's pretty shocking. So COVID is worse than ever, but people are more relaxed about it. So reasons for this could be like one, we're fully vaccinated, most of us are fully vaccinated these days. Two, the borders are fully reopened. And three, we've got big events such as concerts sort of opening up again. But another reason could be because the media is, yeah, so another reason could be because of how the media is covering it these days. There's less coverage on it. We have people like Heather Duplessis-Allen saying that the pandemic is pretty much over. And we've got people like Nick Mills here telling Michael Baker to sort of get on with his life as we should with ours. But journalists aren't always like this, but sometimes it can be contradictory when they sort of report on the virus. So later that same day that Nick Mills told Michael Baker what he said, he also sort of said how much he was scared of the BA5 variant. So it can be contradictory with the media, how they cover COVID, and it's also how we're contradictory as well, how we wear masks and stuff like that. So yeah, that's pretty much the episode. How should journalists report on a topic that we're all just wanting to end? So yeah, something.
Great.
This Mediawatch episode brings to our attention the idea of Pillar 1, which is journalism's first obligation is to the truth. Highlighted in the episode was the idea that COVID-19 is over and we should all just move on and stop talking about it. This is not true though, because 8 people died from COVID in New Zealand the same day that Heather Duplessis made her comment. 15 people died from COVID this past Sunday in the country, and in the UK there's around 13,000 beds that are currently occupied by COVID-19 patients. Pillar 1, journalists' job is to tell the truth, as Pillar 1 says, and therefore they can't ignore the ongoing issues of COVID, even if the audiences are tired of hearing about it. Mark Dowder says that in regards to COVID-19, it's no longer temporary, it's here to stay with us, and I don't think that journalists have really figured out how to cover it as a daily issue, just like we cover all of the other issues that are really problematic. In order for journalists to be able to speak truth to a willing audience, they should reframe the way in which they share their information. The same way journalists and the media report on the housing crisis, for example, and those effects, the same could be done in relation to COVID-19. Audiences may be frustrated with COVID-related news, but the mission of truth-telling in journalism overrides the audience imperative. In the book, The Elements of Journalism, the author says the function of truth is to bring light to hidden facts and understand reality through them. This explains why it is essential that journalists continue to report on and tell the truth about COVID-19. Kovacs and Rosenstiel explain that people understand the world and their community through news, and that it therefore must be truthful and reliable. In order for New Zealanders to understand the severity of COVID-19, journalists must strive to tell the full truth about it so that audiences are given a complete picture. Finally, Mark Dowder said, just because it is not a temporary crisis anymore, it does not mean that we should ignore it. And by reporters expressing the idea that COVID is over, they are essentially ignoring the truth.
So I want to talk about Pillar 4, which is its practitioners must maintain an independence from those they cover, and hopefully reveal a little bit about why we're all feeling, including the journalists, sick and tired of the sickness. So I wanted to start with this comment by Ed Herman. He's a photographer, journalist for the UN, and he says, this is back when COVID started, despite the risks, I felt it was really important subject to cover. To my knowledge, it is one of the only stories in the world, except perhaps the Second World War, which affects absolutely everyone. And so what this means, first and foremost, is that journalists are people. And so journalists, they play this vital role in reporting and telling the truth and getting the facts, but they too share these feelings of uncertainty and frustration with the audience and the public that they aim to serve. So there's this interesting conflict with this issue on reporting on COVID, an event that we're all affected by, and this pillar which says that journalists must be independent entities from what they cover. Mark Dilber, who was interviewed in the Mediawatch episode, said journalists are people just like anyone else, not wanting to keep having to think about and write about COVID. So going to the Kovac and Rosenstiel reading, under the breakdown of the pillar, they note in some ways this fourth principle is rooted in pragmatism rather than theory. And so what they're discussing here is that being a participant in an event can cloud all other tasks and practices that journalists must perform. So it's difficult to remain objective, it's difficult to combat for other sides. And so the nature of this pillar is pragmatically clear and can override theoretical consideration. Then they also note, but is it an act of arrogance and probably naivety or delusion to think that it won't get in the way? However, the nature of COVID, like Herman refers to earlier, is that COVID affects everybody. So it's nearly an impossible task to separate the two, right? This quote by Hayden Donnell, who was the author of the Mediawatch interview, he asked, do you think there's been an unwillingness from parts of the media commentary that were telling us the Omicron variant was mild and we can just live with the virus to contend with the reality of their wishes coming true? And so from this comment and with the evidence provided by the episode, things like lack of audience engagement and therefore minimized media coverage, we can infer that the treatment of Pillar 4 was maybe not upheld, and then we can now we can begin to see the threat of that. And that's not by lack of effort or arrogance like Kovac and Rosenstiel referred to earlier, but because of the nature of these unprecedented times. So journalists have had to adapt and navigate through that. This final comment by C.P. Scott, he says, comment is free, but facts are sacred. And I think that this roots the message of this episode in relation to Pillar 4 and also what Mary discussed in Pillar 1 as well, that the fact is that COVID is rife in the community and we are experiencing extreme death cases. Therefore, our comments or our feelings around being sick and tired of COVID reporting come second to journalistic obligation.
My team members have spoken a lot about COVID not being reported. So the current situation we've gone to is another extreme. At the start of the pandemic 2 years ago, we were constantly bombarded with facts about different vaccines, different strains, the number of death rates, the number of cases. And slowly and steadily, everywhere around the world, people have become desensitized. This phenomenon is also being coined as COVID-19 exhaustion. As you can see, there's general disengagement around the world in the news media outlets and the general public. They're tired of listening to the constant news. At the start of the pandemic, all of you can relate. Things were getting misinformed. There was a lot of misinformation coming out of the virus. What vaccine should you take? Should you not take the vaccine? And it's hard for news media outlets to explain scientific facts to the general public. And to simplify such a disease and keep it palatable for everyone, it's hard. But what we're seeing now is the public is completely disengaged from COVID-19. They don't want to hear about it. They're sick and tired of wearing masks. They're sick and tired of learning about the new facts. It makes it hard for journalists to keep reporting it, because in the end, the newspaper needs to make money, and they're going to serve that purpose. But that undermines the journalist's personal responsibility. It also undermines the people who are constantly being affected by COVID-19, the frontline staff who is battling the pandemic still, and the people who are facing deaths in their own families by COVID-19. And misinformation hasn't gone. I had COVID-19 about 3 weeks ago. After a week of isolation, I was still testing positive, but the news, the information given by the government was I can come out of isolation. So there's a constant miscommunication. People are tired, they want to live their lives normally. And now the coverage of the news has shifted to inflation, cost of living, increased gang and criminal activity, which are all newsworthy topics, but we shouldn't be undermining something that's still going on, and it's still very prevalent in our society. I think what journalists can do is still do a condensed report of the deaths, the facts, and daily hospitalization rates. We could also do profile pieces on the people who are being affected by the pandemic still, like the doctors, the medical staff, give recognition to the people who have been battling COVID-19 for 2 years now, 2.5 years now. And we as journalists shouldn't be looking for clicks. We should be looking to present the truth as it is. And we should be keeping this pillar in mind and not undermining it and playing it off as COVID-19 is going.
So I'm sure like a lot of us are here, like we're keen for the summer, right? We can't wait for the winter to end, and I'm sure a lot of journalists feel the same way too, and rightfully so. You know, the numbers are in fact going down, so we've reached the peak of Omicron, but it doesn't mean that we can rest on our laurels, you know, including journalists. They can't rest on their laurels, so it's important that they uphold these pillars, because these reports of COVID lasting for another 5 years. So it's important that journalists uphold these pillars for the next summer, the next 5 years, and beyond. That's the presentation.
Great.